Okay, so let's continue. I'm just working a little bit this edge over here before I move to a new area. Sort of easing myself into drawing here. I think there's a dark line that is causing the sort of sharpness we're seeing, so let's try to remove a little bit of that. So instead of just darkening everything else, we can just lighten that dark line a little bit to smooth things out a little bit. Okay, so far we've worked this area. I'm all right with how it's looking. Sort of tackled this transition area over here. Perhaps there's something we can do about this weird looking spot over there. Just put my mind at ease. Sort of rendered over here. I mean, we started with this large, fairly subtle area, so we probably want to retouch this area a little bit. Just make it a little nicer. So maybe we do that now, so I can then call this area finished. I'm really just dot picking right now. I'm just trying to make it feel more even as a tone, so we can then tell more what's going on over here. Now it feels a bit messy. Can't really tell any subtle things happening. So the goal is to make a single pass, of course, but you know, if you aren't happy with the result you had with the first pass, then obviously you're allowed to fix things as you see necessary. One thing I also noticed, I sort of pulled this light shape a little bit too high here, just not correct in terms of drawing. So we pushed the arc a little bit down. Now it's looking a little bit more like our reference on the left. Okay, so well, maybe we can start working on the teeth area. Seems like it can be a lot of fun. So this is a very dark area, of course. We might need to use the orange stick here, but we'll just see. This is going to be more cleaning off the tones because this is fairly dark already, and already treated it as a shadow once. Let's just refine it a little bit more where the sort of darker tone is right next to there, instead of, well, right next to the right side of this shape. As you can see, there's a pretty much a linear thing going on. We're not going to make it a line. As I said before, that's not really something we're striving for. Doesn't look very realistic, if that's a word you can use in this case, but at least it's not well designed, I think, if we put it like that. This edge we want to definitely have soft to make it recede. It's going to be a bit more atmospheric if we sort of soften a little bit of the tone next to the tooth. Don't really want to like ruin the drawing or anything like that, but probably have to darken the edge a little bit and pick out some fuzziness into that outline. Especially you want the cheekbone that is going behind the tooth, this edge right here, being very soft, as having it softer in the back than in the front. That makes things recede, and it gives sort of the illusion that this tooth, or sorry, the portion of the upper jaw is a little bit higher up than the, or not higher up, but in front of the cheekbone that is going back. But this area is shadows. We're going to tackle that during the rendering of the darks. But just to point that out, this edge was kind of perfect at the start. It's, you know, it's very soft. It's not lost, but it's very soft. So as per usual, just first refining the shapes, finding the correct values, and then working any transitions. These are such small areas that usually a couple touches even are enough to already work the shapes and transitions and softness, and like I'm basically just dot picking here and trying not to leave white spots like that, but you know, does happen. Just need to have a very sharp point to remedy something like that, where we can just get right into the small paper texture. Even if I said I'm not gonna dot pick, I'm sort of, it's a necessity in this area to dot pick a little bit, because you just can't get the accurate representation of what's going on if you don't dot pick something like this. If this drawing was a lot larger, then I could get away with not, fiddling around so much. But one thing I was about to say but got sidetracked is that this darker area of the big four modeling, where the sort of the arc of the teeth is turning, this side obviously being lighter than that side, we're looking for like relative contrast over here. So the shadows are a little bit darker than what we maybe see on here, like objectively speaking. If we were to pick that value and this value, we would find that this is a bit darker. But the contrast remains very similar between the dark shadow of this tooth and the halftone and the light area with this image as well. It's not perfect, obviously, because I'm in the process of working those teeth, but I'm trying to first push the entire teeth a bit darker and then work the individual volumes within that context, if that makes sense. So everything will be a little bit darker, but their relationship of the values should remain similar in order to have these appear as teeth and not some dark mass. These things aren't very simple to explain, but I hope that made a lot of sense. To this tooth, I pull a little bit of a highlight out. Back tooth also has a little bit of that going on. That said, maybe this tooth is a little bit on the darker side, so let's just bring that plane a little bit down. Here I'm basically just going one small area at a time, so just trying to refine these teeth, have enough separation to have them appear as teeth, but try to remove anything that is extremely sharp, distracting with the amount of contrast they're producing. Perhaps here we're able to just push this dark accent below the teeth. Again, one of the darkest areas in the entire image. The shadow underneath the teeth. So let's make that happen. You can just soften the effect a little bit so they don't appear that sharp. Since we'll tackle this area maybe separately during the rendering of the darks. Went a little too light with that, so let's just sort of reset a little bit. Let's find this highlight that is going on. Actually need to adjust the articulation a little bit here. Cleaning things up a little bit, we start to find something a bit more refined looking. I think this also needs to go a little bit higher up over here. Sort of lacking connection a little bit here. I think it's easy to add a little bit of charcoal into that darker sector rather than bring it directly to the perfect end result. Small texture bits over here are a bit hard to convey. Sort of the paper texture as a sort of base resolution kind of starts to come in our way. It's hard to make anything very definite with that as a starting point, so maybe we can just leave those be for now. I noticed a little something here. The shape appears to be a little bit too too tall, so I think we need to actually move this entire light area a little bit lower. That means that some other things will have to move as well, but we want to just nudge things to the right direction, let's say. Perhaps that means that we need to also push this a little bit downwards as well, and at the same time we can also take a little bit of the roundness of this. And I'll reiterate, no one's perfect. Mistakes happen to everyone and they need to be fixed. Painting and drawing is basically a process of fixing mistakes until you're finished, I think so. In an ideal scenario, it may be that you just apply more and more knowledge on the paper or canvas or whatever you're working on, but it tends to be that there is an element of back and forth with the process. And sometimes it sucks because you've already worked an area and have to then go back to it, and then you need to sort of do double the work for a single area to be finished, but I think we still need to push that a little bit further down. Now this shape looks a little bit more in proportion, but I think there's the opposite thing we can do as well, which is just nudge this a little bit higher. This kind of stuff is somewhat optional, I think, but also, like in the end, you're making a work of art. Okay, the main goal is, I suppose, to learn, but accuracy is not the reason people look at this drawing, so it has to, be able to stand on its own at the end. But if you want to strive to get better, then I think fix anything and everything you spot, basically, and you will get better. And even a fairly major thing like that, I mean, I was off by many millimeters there in total. How long did that take to fix? Like maybe 5 minutes? It's not too bad. Perhaps if I got the entire forehead region wrong and I would have to move things around, that might take longer, but you'll end up with a better drawing in the end if you have to go through something like that. I think this halftone is a little bit on the dark side of things, so let's just clean it up a little bit and make it lighter. All right, I think it's time for a break. And we'll simply be carrying on once we get back to it. Right. New day, new session. Let's carry on rendering the teeth. One thing I was wondering about a little bit was maybe the average tone of this tooth could be a little bit lighter, and already we basically lifted up quite a bit of the tone. possibly around here as well. Just trying to be very delicate with this brush. I think that's looking a little bit better. One thing to mention while I'm working on these teeth and any sort of smaller areas, many times you have to just address the shadows while you're working the lights, because there's so many subtle things that will shift while you're working. It's not really worthwhile to save, you know, a couple millimeter area for a separate stage in the future when you can just do a couple of strokes and call the area done. So if you're wondering why I'm working the shadows while I'm here, just sort of trying to finish the teeth in one go basically. Okay, I try to work a bit more silently here so we can, well, for one, progress more because I can focus better, and of course I can speed the footage up. Okay, let's keep working on the teeth. After that, there's not too many things we actually like really have to address before calling this finished, but definitely want to make these detail areas work, since those are kind of stuff that is pulling attention. We have some, you know, large areas that we haven't touched, like, you know, the main area of light over here and the jaw and stuff like this, but they're fairly like large, but they're not very complex. We can get away with some you know, small refinements, I think, here and there, and cleaning up, but we don't have to, like, you know, find a lot of small shapes like in the teeth. So I think we're at a good pace in this rendering. And every time I'm taking a break, I'm sharpening my tools again, so I don't have to deal with dull points or anything like that. So it's a good thing to do while you take a break. I think it's good to have at least 2 spares, so you generally can work for like half an hour, even more if you have 3 very sharp points, and, you know, if you drop one and the point suffers from it, then you can just keep working. You don't have to immediately start sharpening things, which can be annoying. already had a good run with the camera, not turning off for a couple sessions. I thought I'd fixed it, but now it did it again. So I don't know, kind of frustrating, but I'm just working with what I got, so it's a bit annoying because I have to start recording every 4 minutes or so if it keeps turning off, so which means I gotta turn on the audio recording and rename the file and turn on the video recording separately, so let's hope it doesn't do it again, at least instantly. Just nudging this shadow shape while I'm here, since I see there's an obvious like discrepancy between the drawing I have and what's actually happening on the reference. And since it's very quick to push around with this brush I have, why not do it now? Another thing we can nudge a little bit would be this edge over here, if we can, with the brush. Maybe if you've been drawing, painting for a longer time and or you're sensitive to these things, you might start picking up the fact that these shadows are a bit warmer than the lights. And that's not just a trick of the camera. It's the fact that the soft charcoal sometimes gives a little bit of a different temperature than the harder charcoals. And that can sometimes show in areas like this where we grouped it initially as a shadow, like this area, for example. And even though we sort of push it back towards the lights, the temperature difference remains where this feels a bit warmer than the stuff next to it. It's not really something that is a bad thing necessarily. The warm cool kind of thing can work nicely, especially since generally the darks seem to be warmer than the lights. It's consistent. But some areas might be a little bit inconsistent with that if we sort of have to make decisions about grouping stuff. But just know it's the material that you're using that sort of defines that. And of course, if you use a different brand of charcoal powder, different brands of charcoal, you might have a sort of mess of different temperatures. It's very subtle, but it might show in the final result. So I just wanted to say that now that we're sort of addressing this area where the value is approaching the same, because we want to make this a soft transition, but we're not going to be really making the color the same, if that's the correct term here, if we don't really have control over that. So I just wanted to explain why that happens. So I've said this sometimes, I said this before during a demo I've done, I can't remember which portion, but when you have these sort of repeating shapes, we could call them these like hill shapes or round cylinder shapes of any kind really. The way you can make them look like forms is having the sort of shadow or darker edge of the forms appear slightly sharper than the sort of form edges that happen. So this form is going to always be softer towards the light, and that way we can make it appear like it's turning that way. If we have them evenly sort of sharp on both sides, they'll just look like graphic shapes and it won't read as forms. Now we can see that it's sort of turning. Sometimes we can have them both more or less equally soft and it'll still work, but having them both sharp is not going to work. And we always want to err on the side of softness, I think. if you have small shadows like this tooth area here, leaving this sort of linear shape with some smaller shadow shapes in it, just try to have some variety within. That'll always sort of start hinting at something's happening, even if it's very small and you can't really tell exactly what's going on in there. If anything else, you can just find something like dark accents to do a little bit of work for you. Even just darkening something a little bit can sort of hint at there being depth in the shadows. If they're just a single value, it's more likely to just appear as a flat shape. Also try to keep them soft. I think I'm gonna say that a lot during this demo and the upcoming ones. It's always gonna be softer. I think that area is looking a little bit sort of patchy or unclean around here. I'm just gonna see if I can slightly smush it with the brush. Doing this, just sort of trying to minimize the sort of dot picking labor wherever I can. Not so much a laziness, but rather efficiency. Dot picking honestly is kind of relaxing, but I don't think it's very interesting to look at, so. I don't think I'm gonna do much to this area or the nose area anymore. Maybe I'll nudge some things around in the teeth if I feel like it after I finish everything else, but we'll see how it looks at the end. So I'll probably do some of the detail work over here as well as the fun area with the texture over here. I think I might want to work on this texture stuff over here. So I'm just vaguely gonna sort of reference these shapes we're seeing. First just gonna drop in those sort of cracks and crevices, and then we'll pull some lights. So we're definitely not copying this texture, we're just referencing it, let's say. If there's some obvious shapes, we can, of course, pick them out. It's gonna be a little bit more true to the image we're seeing. But the main feeling we want to convey is naturally these being sort of craggly texture bits. A little bit of texture is emerging. I think one thing we want to be careful of is not making everything too similar, so having a bit of varied mark making, let's say, in erasing, like not just pulling everything horizontally, and varying degrees of sharpness and softness and all that stuff. It's going to be a good thing. Then we can go in and further emphasize the texture of the area by pulling in shadows next to these craggly areas. Of course, just sort of popping out the contrast around those. And we want to go a bit, back and forth on this one. We don't want to try to finish everything in one pass. You would just pick an extremely small area and create a bit of texture and try to like almost copy everything, but I think this is a more fun way to do it. Also, if you find that you just go a little bit too contrasty in some area, which I think we want to avoid having too much stuff going on, pulling attention away from the other bits of the drawing, and just hatch over it with the sharp stick. Generally, it'll slightly pull out the charcoal from the darker areas and also, of course, tone in the lighter bits, so you can sort of even things out a little bit, make them a bit more mellow. One thing we can vary also is having, you know, larger planes, smaller planes, more texture, less texture. I think this is a place where you can sort of have a little bit of that creative freedom. It can actually be quite fun to do. And that's not to say this drawing hasn't been fun to make, it's just that it's very different from, you know, something very fun and playful like texture. It's accurate and refined, let's say. When you're making texture, I think it's a good idea to step back and look at the overall effect. Is it reading similarly across the room? If not, maybe you need to soften things, lighten general areas, darken general areas, you know, make the appearance similar. I think just sort of pass it with the eraser a little bit, just knock down the contrast even a little bit more. You can have these sort of smaller highlight bits, but in general we don't want to have too many of those. Just trying to look for the sort of nice average values of each area. So yeah, I think that's more or less what we wanted to achieve. It was fun while it lasted for a whole like 5 minutes or so, but I think that's something we can leave on there. Luckily there's a little bit more we can do over here, for example. Sometimes in these very light areas where it's difficult to even leave a tone light enough, and even light tone with these sharp little charcoal sticks we have, we can just sort of try our best and then slightly smooth things off with the brush. So even though as a general rule we don't want to use the charcoal sticks during rendering, we can. Just use it selectively. So it seems we're missing a little bit of plane information over this area. Just let's add those in. Right, let's leave it here for now and let's keep working on the next session. Let's get back to it. I think the next thing that we'll be doing is working a bit on this jaw area. Basically as a summary of what we still, I think, have to do in the lights. On a little bit of this detail stuff over here. Maybe reinforce this plane over here, the sort of temple area. It sort of caves in a little bit and then comes back out. We want to convey that. We want to find this plane over here. The brow is slightly lighter. It's sort of facing the light more, where the left side of the forehead over here is, you know, a little bit more vertical, catching less light. And then we'll just have to refine the top area of the skull. And I think that's going to be it for lights. Unless I want to go back into the teeth area and refine some things, I might. But also it's the teeth are so small that you really have to like dot pick a lot to make them look very smooth and nice. I think they read well enough now for our purposes. But if something bothers us, I'll be sure to, you know, refine those things a little bit. But yeah, first let's just get everything covered. So into the jaw area. So this is another area where we're sort of tackling the mixing of the mediums again, where we have this dark smudge of the soft pastel, and then we are facing it next to a sort of well, kind of a light plane. We don't really want to have it super sharp, and if we want to sort of adjust the articulation over here, we can't really push the soft pastel back a lot, and it's a bit tricky. I'm just leaning a lot on my initial accuracy, but if one has to make, bigger changes at this point into the articulation, it's gonna really bite you. All right. Maybe the final session of the lights. We'll see.